Hello and welcome to the Armor 3.0 video. We're going over all the changes in depth, giving you the real raw numbers, even though you really don't care as long as you know that the damage numbers go burr. We're going to go over everything that's new with stats and armor, as well as what you need to know to not only make new builds, but convert your old builds to the new system. But what exactly is new? Well, stats have gotten a complete overhaul. Stat tiers are now gone, with each point in every stat mattering just as much as the last. No longer are you worrying about wasted stats. Stats themselves have also been reworked, though the correct word would be overhaul, since they got big changes coming into Edge of Fate. Mobility, resilience, and recovery are now gone, with base effects of those stats being moved into base kit. Mobility put in at tier 3 for Warlocks and Titans, tier 4 for Hunters. Recovery was put in at tier 6. Allegedly, there's evidence to suggest that this amount of recovery is somewhere closer to tier anywhere from 2 to 4. But to be honest, I don't fully understand what the most accurate statement is regarding recovery. Hopefully there is more clarification to come on that later. Resilience was put into base at tier 10, which is very welcome in activities over your level. Otherwise, you just feel like wet cardboard. Strength, discipline, and intellect are now melee, grenade, and super respectively, and work largely the same way they did before, with some changes that actually make them relevant. Along with the reworked stats, new stats have joined the lineup: class, health, and weapons. Class is just the ability cooldown reduction stat for class abilities, but this time it works for all classes, and well, we're talking about the other two in our upcoming segment. The numbers themselves have also changed. Stats now max out at 200 instead of the previous 100. However, instead of just getting more of the same thing, stats above 100 grant a secondary benefit on top of the primary benefit from the 100 in the stat. We now go to the next part of this segment where we describe each stat in detail with secondary benefits as well. Before we start the great stat yap of 2025, please note that when I say that something scales with a stat, you can assume that that scaling is linear. It means that at 50% of that stat, you get half the effect of maxing that stat. 75 gives you 75%, so on. In addition, the cooldown reduction and energy gains for abilities on the stats that are not health and weapons are such that 70 in the new stats roughly equal tier 10 on the old system, meaning that above 70, you can expect to see more uptime pre-Edge of Fate, and vice versa. Health, from 0 to 100, increases the amount of health you gain from picking up an Orb of Power, and grants passive flinch resist when taking damage. The healing on Orb pickup scales from 0 to 100, and the flinch resist scales up to 10%. From 100 to 200, the health stat decreases the time it takes for your shields to start charging, and increases the speed at which they charge. It also grants you bonus shield capacity. The regen start time scales up to 25% faster, and the speed at which they do so scales up to 50% faster. The extra shield scales up to 20 at max. From 0 to 100, melee increases the base cooldown of your melee ability and increases the melee energy gains from all sources. The base cooldown scale is dependent on your selected abilities' base cooldown, and the amount of increased energy gain scales up to 190% of base and max. From 100 to 200, the damage of all melee abilities increases, which now includes powered and unpowered attacks, which, as a friendly reminder, now includes glaive attacks. The damage increase scales up to 30% extra damage at 200. From 0 to 100, Grenade increases the base cooldown of your grenade ability, and increases the amount of grenade energy gained from all sources. The base cooldown scale is dependent on your selected grenade ability's base cooldown, and the amount of increased energy gain scales up to 190% of base at max. From 100 to 200, Grenade increases the damage of all grenade abilities up to a maximum of 65%. From 0 to 100, Super increases the amount of super energy gained from all sources except your super's base cooldown. The extra super energy gains scales up to 190% additional super energy at max. From 100 to 200, Super increases your super's damage up to a maximum of 45%. From 0 to 100, class decreases the base cooldown of your class ability and improves the amount of class ability energy gained from all sources. The amount of energy gained scales up to an additional 65%, and the cooldown reduction depends on your selected class ability. From 100 to 200, class grants an overshield on class ability cast, the duration and health scale with stat investment, as well as the class ability itself. The health can scale up to a maximum of 40 HP at max, and the overshield can last up to 5 seconds on dodges and thruster, and up to 10 seconds on rift and barricade. Don't ask about Phoenix Dive, because I didn't test it. 0 to 100, weapons gives improved handling and reload to all weapons, and improves damage versus minor and major combatants, so just non-bosses. The extra reload and handling goes up to 10%, and the extra damage increases by 15% for primary and special ammo weapons, and 10% for heavy weapons. From 100 to 200, ammo bricks now have a chance to contain bonus ammo, and damage increases versus bosses and guardians. The extra ammo chance scales up to 100% at max, and the extra boss damage is on the same scaler as the non-boss damage, up to 15% for non-heavy and 10% for heavy. The bonus damage for guardians is consistent and caps out at 6% at 100. Now that we're done with stats, let's talk armor, which has also changed pretty heavily. Random rolls on armor are, for the most part, gone. Armor stat distribution is dependent on archetype and a slight amount of RNG, with its stat total being dependent on gear tier. Gear will have a primary and secondary stat that is determined by its archetype, as well as a tertiary stat, which is selected at random. Gear can roll a maximum of 30 in its primary stat, 25 in its secondary stat, and 20 in its tertiary stat, with tier 5s always having a perfect 30, 25, 20 split. Armor tiers influence the stat total that you're roll with higher tiers having higher possible bands. Tier 1s can roll from 52 to 57, tier 2s from 58 to 63, tier 3 from 64 to 69, nice. Tier 4s from 70 to 75, and tier 5s will always have a perfect 75 total. In addition, tier 4 plus armor has an additional mod energy slot for a total of 11 mod energy, and tier 5 armor will have a randomly selected tuned stat, which is only affected by the stat tuning mods. Stat tuning allows you to add 5 to the randomly selected stat by subtracting 5 from any other stat. You can also select the balance tuning option, which will just add 1 to each of the lowest stats in that armor piece. Masterworking has also changed pretty substantially. Masterworking is now done in 5 tiers rather than 10, and each Masterwork level increases the lowest 3 stats of your gear by 1 each, meaning you get a plus 15 total for fully masterworking a piece of armor. Masterworking now also has a different cost depending on gear tier, and because I want you to retain your brain cells, we're only going over the total cost of full masterworking armor. Tier 1 costs 3 enhancement cores and a little bit of glimmer. Tier 2 costs 4 enhancement cores and a lot more glimmer. Tier 3 costs 15 cores, 3 prisms, and an ascendant shard. Tier 4 costs 19 cores, 7 prisms, and 2 ascendant shards. And Tier 5 costs 26 cores, 13 prisms, and 3 ascendant shards. Exotics use a unique scaler and cost 15 cores, 4 prisms, and 3 ascendant shards to fully masterwork. The only other change of note is that armor stat mods now have standardized costs. Minor stat mods now cost 1, and standard stat mods now cost 3. And this is true for everything. They really should have done this a long time ago. Now, I imagine the more astute among you will likely have already updated your builds to this new system. But for those of you feeling overwhelmed, here's how you should go about this. Step 1 is that you should be picking 2 to 3 stats that are most important to your build, and then rank those in order of importance. After that, you should determine which armor archetype you'll need to achieve those stats. Keep in mind, you might not actually get the most value by getting the primary archetype of your most important stats. If your priority stats are melee and super in that order, you might still be able to get the numbers you want just from Paragon armor alone. If you need 3 priority stats, or your stats don't have a matching archetype as of current, you may need to mix and match different archetypes to get the numbers you want, or to round out your 3rd, or sometimes even 4th stat, though I would not worry about rounding out a 4th stat until you are certain you are happy with your primary 3. Tertiary stat bonuses are also immensely helpful in rounding out your build, especially if it's your tertiary build stat, or the current archetypes are misaligned for your stat targets. Second important question to ask is whether or not you actually see any benefit by maxing your stat. While it seems like you want to just gun for 200 in whatever your primary stat is, that may not be the case. If your build relies on getting supers consistently, but doesn't necessarily rely on those supers doing a lot of damage, like a Well of Radiance or Tether setup, going past 100 won't really do that much for you, because the most benefit you'll see is the reduced cooldown. Some setups will actually care about those enhanced 200 stats, like Nighthawk, Quirus, and Nova setups, which absolutely want to gun for 200 super as closely as possible. However, keep in mind, if you are pushing for a 200 stat target, you likely won't be able to hit double 100s elsewhere. So make sure it's actually something that you care about going for. The two situations where you really want the bonus stat values are that you get value out of that bonus stat consistently enough to make it worth sacrificing elsewhere, or your build is just narrow and specific enough, and the bonus stat good enough, to warrant going to 200, even if you're not getting that benefit maybe nearly as often. A good example of the first situation would be Starfire Warlocks going to 200 grenades, since they're going to have pretty much infinite grenades if they play it right, meaning it kind of doesn't matter where else they sacrifice. And for the second example, this approach is probably going to be used to justify most raid and dungeon damage setups being spec for 200 super or weapons. The benefit of having 200 super is just so good that it kind of doesn't matter that you're losing out elsewhere. For example of a fully updated build, let's take a look at the updated Incinerator Snap build that I went over in a previous video. Our stat targets are melee, super, and grenade in that order. As for how far we want to push those stats, the choice is pretty clear that 200 just is not it for any of these stats. You would think that we'd want to go 200 melee for more damage on our Incinerator Snap, but ignitions no longer scale with the damage of the melee attack that caused them, and because most of the damage is in the ignition, we don't really get that much by going above 100. Super is in much the same situation, since the main thing we get from Song of Flame is snap spam, so we're sticking to 100 for it as well. Also, according to Chili, allegedly you max out super and grenade when you pop Song of Flame, but I still need to verify that. Please don't take that truth for face value. Grenade, on top of being our tertiary stat, is used almost exclusively for Bleak Watchers, which we're not running for the damage they do, so we're just sending it to 100 for maximum value on Devour. After hitting 100 on our 3 stats, I still had some numbers left to work over with, so I just decided to spec into weapons since that was better value than health or class for this build, and weapons tends to be universally applicable. The armor spread I ended up with was a tier 5 Paragon helmet with balance tuning and a super mod, a tier 3 set of Paragon gloves with a super mod, a tier 4 chest armor with a weapon mod, tier 4 pair of bomber boots with a super mod, and for my exotic, Necro Claw is a brawler archetype with a grenade mod to get my grenade up to 100. This ends up working out very nicely for me since Paragon secondarily spikes into melee, meaning we're already getting most of our primary 2 stats just by speccing into one archetype. Bomber boots are helping us get just that little extra grenade bump that we really need, and after that, our primary stats are pretty much almost there, just needing a slight bump to grenade, which we can get by a gunner armor secondary stat. Since we can get our stats through gunner armor, we pretty much have a green light to go full send on speccing towards weapons after that. I hope this video was helpful to you in some way, either helping you learn the basics of build crafting under this new system, or if you're just looking to get started updating your builds in the new sandbox. Let me know what builds you plan on running in the Edge of Fate. I've seen some particularly spicy ones floating around there. And if you want even more direct feedback, you do well to seek it out in my community Discord. There are plenty of people willing to help you build craft and theory craft, even if that means just running through the portal to get some armor that you need. I'm also active in there too, so if you ever want to see me around outside of these videos and actually interact with me, that's the best place to find me. Build videos should hopefully return next week, although I am doing some damage testing, which you hopefully will see the results of soon. Alrighty, I will see you in the next one. Bye for now! You stay alive.
Where's me,
No.
bro? I have a ray gun.